Hello, everybody. Oh my God, you're so good. I'm Todd McCaffrey. The panel is someone else's hero. Some heroes are heroic, others are not. How do you write a dynamic hero who has the capacity to learn and grow? And we seem to be short a moderator, so we're having the invisible moderator day today. We don't know what happened, but we'll start by introducing everybody.
Hi, thanks. Hi, I'm Caryn Larrinaga. I'm an award-winning author of mystery, horror, and a little bit of urban fantasy. You can find me at the horror writers table in the hallway outside the vendor room. I'm Kathryn Purdie. I'm the author of the Burning Glass series with HarperCollins, and I've got a new series coming out after that called Bone Grace.
And I'm David Farland. I'm a science fiction fantasy author. My biggest series is probably The Rune Lords. I also work with the Writers of the Future contest, which is one of the world's largest science fiction fantasy writing contests. And I also teach a lot of writers through various workshops and things like that.
Forgot to say I write young adult fantasy.
You should. More young adult fantasy. The more young adult fantasy we have, the more young adults we get. This is good. I'm Todd McCaffrey. I'm well known for writing in the Dragon Riders of Pern universe, which is first started by Anne McCaffrey. I'm very pleased to warn you all, if you're still looking for a Pern fix, that there are only two people allowed to write on Pern. One is me. The other one is my sister, and her first Pern novel will be coming out in October. You can pre-order it from all fine booksellers all over the world. So I should say that. So, having said all of this, so let me ask an open-ended question, and then I'll run it over to Dave first. But what makes a hero for you?
I think, first of all, a hero has to grow, okay? The very first thing that I look for in a hero is, do I have a rooting interest in that character? Are they trying to attempt something fairly noble? Or are they tempted to try to do something fairly noble? By that I mean, there are two kinds of heroes. One is the hero. That's the person who starts off in the story wanting to help other people, wanting to save the society, and they're easy to get rooting interest in that character because we empathize with them right out the gate. But there's another kind of a hero, and that's a little bit of a darker hero, the anti-hero. The anti-hero typically already knows how to kick ass really well, and all you have to do is make him care about somebody enough so that he will start kicking ass. And we're seeing a lot more stories that are dealing with anti-heroes nowadays than with heroes. It's not a very heroic age, I guess is the best way to say it in fiction. But there are all sorts of combinations too. And so I just love exploring that. I write a lot of heroic fiction.
I would say that the anti-hero doesn't know he or she is an anti-hero. They probably think they're doing a great, awesome thing. And I'm sitting here trying to think of an answer to this question, and what's the difference between like a hero and a protagonist? And I would maybe pose that a hero has a quest or a journey, more in that archetype. That's my thoughts at this point. I think one important aspect for me as a reader, and I try to incorporate this in my writing, is that a hero shouldn't just succeed and be striving to succeed at whatever the primary quest is, saving the whoever or finding the lost XYZ. But they should also be having some kind of personal success and experiencing some type of personal growth. So getting over something in their life, and I think that that's what we really connect with, because those are the types of quests that we have in our own lives. We're not necessarily finding dragon eggs, but we are becoming better, stronger people. So I have another thought. So how would you say that the anti-hero, what's the anti-hero's inner arc? Where a hero usually goes, it's like more of an underdog journey, the typical hero.
The typical anti-hero is trying to learn to gain compassion. Very often they have been beat up kicked around by the world, they've lost everything, they've lost the woman or the child that they loved, etc. And now they're trying to learn to care again. And I think that in just about every person's life, we go through little cycles where we care deeply about others, and we give away all of our money and all of our time, and then we say, I've got to get something back for me. And so we give up. And so we have to relearn compassion over and over again.
But we talk about the main heroes and the anti-heroes. I'm afraid that because of what's happened recently, I'm still thinking of the quiet heroes. And we don't write many books about them, but we just saw an incident where somebody decided to give up their life to save the lives of their students. And those are the kind of heroes that at some level really move me the most. Can anybody think of some place where we've written a book like that, where we get that one moment of quiet heroism? Or is it not something we go for?
Usually not in books, maybe short stories.
Yeah.
I would say sometimes it's the supporting character, like Samwise in Fellowship, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, who has this moment in the end, but you're not really thinking of him as the hero all along.
And yeah, I think the world is full of heroes. You know, when you look at it, I know people who are great teachers, and I think of those people as being heroic. I know people who are great mothers or good friends, and I think that these are people who live deep, compassionate lives, lives of service, and they very often don't get recognized or noticed. You know, the crossing guard down the street, the person who volunteers at an animal shelter or something like that. Yeah, I would love to see more books and stories about those people, but I think the problem is they sort of fade into the background compared to those, you know, big guys in flashy, you know, red underwear or whatever.
It's the red.
And I think that same type of person could be, it's like the reluctant hero, which that's kind of a typical hero arc anyway. But they wouldn't necessarily, some heroes are looking for the adventure, and some are like, you know, Katniss, where she didn't really want to go to the Hunger Games, but she's doing it to save her sister from that. Well, I think Kathryn touched on something important there, that whether your hero is looking for adventure or not, I think it's really important that they have a really relatable and grounded reason why they're doing that thing. And the more relatable it is, the more interested that we are in finding out how that story ends for them. Whereas for me personally, if there's, you know, just the epic hero of old where there's somebody to slay, he's going to go slay it, that's what he lives for, that's cool, and it makes for a fun story, but it's not what we crave.
Yeah, you said something a minute ago about when you have a hero, they typically have to have something more than a heroic quest. The heroic quest, quite frankly, isn't very interesting to the reader for very long. It's that personal quest, that inner journey that we go through that is far more important. And many new writers, when they're starting out, they don't realize that. Because when a reader starts reading a story and they're just reading about an outer story, they're reading about someone else. But when we get to that inner journey where the reader suddenly realizes that they have a common problem with that hero, then all of a sudden the story becomes about them. And that is when, as the protagonist grows and changes, also the reader grows and changes. So our audience is touched by that. And there's some new evidence that's been going on with doctors who are studying the psychology of storytelling. And they say that in order to have an epiphany, you have to have that inward journey. That epiphany has to make a difference in the way that the hero changes so that they have an outward victory. When you have that epiphany, what happens is your brain releases the drug oxytocin, which is really important for gaining compassion, but also for turning short-term memories into long-term memories. And so the story actually changes you. if you have a hero journey that's properly told.
Yeah, no, I mean, the hero's journey, that's kind of a typical, he's saying it's not the original thing, and I would say any plot type is not, there's not a new one. So, a reader's gonna fall into that, and if there's nothing to really grip them internally, they're just gonna be sitting there predicting the whole novel, because it's really hard to change that format and bring anything new. So it's our attachment to the character and the voice in which we write, that's where you have your originality.
Okay, now we said it also, yeah, no, I'm actually
We
swinging.
can go home now.
We're done, this is good. That would not be heroic though, however. We've only started our voyage. We talk about heroes, but we also earlier on we differentiated between heroes and protagonists. Now, how many of you are writing heroes, and how many of you are writing protagonists, and why?
I'm fascinated by heroes, and I understand the difference between heroes and protagonists. Protagonists may very often be unlikable. They very often have social designs which are disparate from what I particularly like. And so, yeah, I tend to write almost exclusively what I would call heroic fiction. I'm interested in other types of more cerebral fiction, but when it comes right down to the part that I'm most interested in doing over and over again, I want to write about heroes.
Still thinking about this one. I think mine's like a protagonist halfway and then turns into a hero. A little bit of a thrown into a situation that she didn't foresee or want, but stays in that situation for a noble reason. And she's active and proactive, but she doesn't really see that she can change what's wrong in her nation until about halfway through, and then she turns into a hero. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but that's what I do.
Well, hey, good work. And you?
I think I do a little bit of both. In my cozy paranormal mystery, Dawn's Hill, it's definitely a protagonist. Mackenzie, her primary quest is to get over the death of her father and kind of find herself. But in the vein of a cozy mystery, she ends up getting embroiled and solving a murder along the way. But I also write superhero urban fantasy as well and follow that more traditional, not quite red underwear, but close hero.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sort of going.
What about you?
Well, that's what I was thinking about. Well, in City of Angels, my hero is an artificial intelligence, so it's kind of interesting, and she's very definitely a hero. And the other recent thing that I have out is the Jupiter game, and the central character in that starts out as more of a protagonist and winds up being a hero. But it's quite it's a diplomatic term. So I've been sort of mulling that over. Did you find so you're saying your protagonist turns into a hero?
Yeah.
Doesn't start off a hero. Doesn't wake up, jumps out of bed, flies through the air, jumps into their PJs or their pants and moves on. So why do we feel that we have to talk more about heroes than protagonists?
Now? Or in general, or like today, in this day and age?
In our stories?
I think that for me personally, it's a choice. Okay, I've worked as a prison guard. I've worked as a police officer, and I think time and time again, I find myself seeing evil and ugliness in the world and saying, we've got to fix this. And so when I write about a character, I think I naturally tend to write about people who are compassionate and who will put themselves out and risk their own lives to change the world. And everybody else could go jump in a lake, as far as I'm concerned.
Well.
So it's all heroes all the way down, eh?
Heroes all the way down. No, I think that, I think part of maybe my goal is to try to get people to become heroes, to start, you know, joining in and helping make this world a better place, and get off your duff.
Yeah.
That's really that's my number one message.
Find your inner hero.
Find your inner hero.
And I'm drawn, I tend to write, I've noticed, you know, I wrote books before I was published with the series I have now, but the stories I tend to write often end up being redemption stories. So I like to write those flawed heroes that maybe begin as being selfish or unlikable. And, you know, I mean, you could argue that with, you know, Katniss in the Hunger Games. She's a very unlikable character. And we only like her because occasionally she does an unselfish thing. You know, there's a pretty big one, but then for a while she's selfish in the games. But it's really because of the supporting characters who like her. We like them so much, and because they like her, we like her. But I'm drawn to those flawed heroes.
Flawed heroes. And you?
I think for me it's a little bit of wish fulfillment. That's why I read, that's why I write, because in ordinary, everyday, I don't get to use what I feel like are my great strengths on a regular basis. I get to do what I'm good at and get paid for it from my day job. But I don't get to do the things that I feel like make me great. And in these stories, they get to use those to achieve great things. And so, you know, it's fun to see that unfold on the page, even though my day-to-day life may be a little boring by comparison.
I mean, really, when you get down to it, being able to leap over tall buildings in a single bound is not something you put on a resume. And it's hard to go ahead and come up with some way you can make money on that, short of, yes, I leaped over another building today. So, at some level, heroes have this problem if they have superpowers or if they're superheroes. And I totally lost the question that I came up with. It was a great question, too.
I have a thought while you're thinking of it.
Good. I love that. Go.
I would argue that a hero, something that makes a hero, is that they're better than us. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you read, I won't mention any specific, I don't want to drag any books or authors under the bus, but it's really frustrating when you read, you know, like a trilogy, say, and the first 2 books, this hero is, even if they're flawed, even if they're whatever, that they're doing in the end like the noble thing, and they're better than that. And it's frustrating sometimes in the 3rd book, or really in any book, when that archetype is like messed with too much. It's like we like sometimes, like it's good, like I'm rambling, but like say James Bond movies, and they've experimented more recently with him not always saving the day and not always being the guy that can get the girl. And I like that, but he's still, but I'm still rooting for him because he's still exhibiting the main James Bond qualities of being like this kick-ass, awesome fighter guy that is gonna break the rules to seek justice, or, you know, his goal. But sometimes, I don't know if I'm articulating myself very well, but I think the hero does need to be better than us. And it's that wish fulfillment thing of like, we wish we could be better and do more for our world now. And to read a heroic story about someone that actually does, that's better than us, then that is inspiring for us, and maybe will one day give us the bravery to do the same.
So you're saying then that you're looking for, in creating heroes, that you're looking for someone who's maybe a little bit more morally elevated than the average person? Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Okay. I think that's very. I think that's for me. That's obvious too. I usually try to take my heroes as being fairly common people and moving them into a heroic position where they sort of have to discover that they're heroes and make themselves into heroes. That's kind of the way that I tend to handle it, but there's other ways to do it.
Yeah, like so for example, a book that's really ugly about war, some people will hate it, some people will like it, and the people that will like it will say, well, that's just realistically what would happen, that's what a character would do. They would just curl into a ball and hide in a corner and not want to do it. That's what you would do, you know, the ugliness of war. But we want to read about someone better than that, that actually does something, you know, that accomplishes something. Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing here is that it's very hard to be a hero when you don't have heroic circumstances to operate in.
That's right.
So, you know, if it's day to day, you know, what does Superman do on an off day? It's an issue. So when we look at heroes, we also have to look at the world surrounding them, and that becomes something that we're interacting with. So how do you build your heroic worlds?
Sorry, I've got a thought and I have to get it out of my head.
Go.
Us writers and all write it off.
I know, it's true. If it stays in there too long, it'll get twisted. It'll come out as some horror story. Which isn't bad, I guess. But so just as we were talking about these, that we want those heroes to be better. That we want them to have the courage to be brave in situations where we might be fearful and timid and be hiding under the table. I think it's also really important, though, to make sure that they're still very flawed. And maybe they're not jerks, but maybe they've got some other flaw, because if they're too perfect, then we're not going to be able to relate to that.
They have to defeat their flaw in addition to conquering the world.
Exactly. That's part of that greater arc that they have to go through. And now I've completely forgotten the question.
That's good, so did I. No, seriously, I was off. Oh, no, okay, so you. Where was
the
I?
world, the circumstances.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was coming back to, but I realized I had this much better question, which is, it's okay, here, go back. So, how do you build your superworld?
So I like to write in worlds that are very close to our current worlds. And I think that's because my stories start as fantasies inside my own head, and I'm fantasizing about what could happen in this room right now in Provo, Utah, and I'm not necessarily fantasizing about what could happen on a different planet or in a different time. So I'll usually start with a real world, usually create a town or a city that's fully under my control, so I can make it look like whatever I want it to look like, and I don't have to deal with, well, in Chicago, the trains actually work like this. And then I try to darken it a little bit, to put in something that is deep, that there's a deep-seated evil, that there's deep-seated apathy, something that the hero kind of has to rise up from and fight against.
You haven't spoken for a while, but
You know, I love stories that take you into other worlds, and so for me, I almost always start by creating the world first. So my goal is to create a world that's different from ours, but that's relatable, okay? And so, for example, in the Rune Lords, I wanted to write a medieval fantasy. I wanted it to appeal to people in the United States, to Germany, France, and in the Orient, Asia, that kind of thing. And so I began working on that. I started developing the world, drew out a map, started thinking about ways that creatures might have evolved differently in this world, and then I created a unique magic system that dealt with economies and things like that. And then I started thinking about who's my hero going to be, who are my characters going to be. I wanted to do the everyman, but ever since Lord of the Rings, Frodo Baggins, has kind of represented the everyman, and we've got lots of farm boys going off to become kings. I thought I'd go ahead and have a prince, somebody who came from a different caste. But beyond that, taking time to think about how things could go terribly wrong is an awful lot of fun. And so creating your villains, creating societies, creating various superpowers and things like that, that's all the fun that I tend to have in this job, okay? So I'm really into just creating alternate worlds. That's kind of my starting place, but I feel like my characters have to grow out of that world. It has to be organic. And then the problems that happen in the world have to grow out of that world and out of the societies and characters. So for me, it always starts with, I'm going to build a world.
And in my books, I've done both. There's not a right or a wrong way. Like some I've thought of the world first, and some I've thought of the character. In Burning Glass, the character came first. I knew I wanted to write about an empath and about how that isn't always a beautiful quality to have empathy for people, because not every person deserves empathy. But very quickly, after I knew I wanted to write that, I knew the type of world. I wanted a world that reflected her, someone that's feeling the full spectrum of every kind of emotion, positive or negative, and like a world that's really full of passion. So I modeled it's a fantasy world, but I modeled it after Imperial Russia, because to me, like, all those epic Russian stories are very passionate and a little dark, like Dr. Zhivago and War and Peace, and anyway, you know, Anna Karenina. So, and then I just, how I usually come about the part that the hero needs to overcome is I think of usually one great flaw of an otherwise okay world. And in my world, it's that the very few people that are born with this ability to be a very powerful empath are slaves to the empire, and so then that kind of evolved into more prejudices. So it's about prejudice, but then how would that one thing affect everything in society, and how could it balloon into a much bigger problem? Then it's more of a personal thing that, you know, that really ties in with the personal thing she needs to overcome as well as the external thing. And I have a question, but you should answer the world thing that you asked first.
Well, actually, sort of Dave varied it a little bit. I like that. I mean, one question is, where do you start? You know, it's, you know, which came first, the chicken, the egg, or the starship? Because, you know, where do you write from? You like to create worlds. I generally find myself with a character in the world that is around them. Sometimes I find myself with a plot, and occasionally I just go off and challenge myself, like saying, okay, so write me a short story which shows why the meek could inherit, you know, why it's really good to be meek. And that was quite a fun short story. But mostly I start with character, and the world comes after. You know, what character does this happen? Occasionally I start with world. So it's kind of back and forth. Did you get the answer to this question? You did. Okay, so what's your question?
Well, I just thought about, I was trying to think about, you know, like, we're trying to talk about what's different than your ordinary hero. So although there's like a general hero's quest, even within that, we can bring something more original and think outside the common tropes. And a really common trope for a hero's journey is like the chosen one. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's some great chosen one stories, but like it's sometimes super awesome to just think outside the box. Like Leigh Bardugo, her Shadow and Bone series is a chosen one series, and it's fantastic. And then she wrote, the Crooked Kingdom's the second one. What's the first one called?
Six of Crows.
Six of Crows, which is a heist story. It's about a bunch of thieves on a quest. So, and I would say Kaz Brekker, who I would say is the main hero, is a definite anti-hero. And it's a fascinating story to not have a chosen one. So maybe we can think, is there any other, how can we think outside the box of the chosen one? Because that is usually almost any fantasy or speculative or heroic journey usually falls into this chosen one trope.
Well, you know, Aldous Budrus, who was one of my mentors, used to say that if you look at fantasy here in America, that very often it's the last remnant of Christian fiction in existence, because in Christian fantasy most of the tropes are based upon biblical prophecies and biblical powers, the powers of priesthood, and most of the stories that we deal with in fantasy deal with good and evil with a capital G and a capital E, and it's the only place where we can actually talk about good and evil and, you know, penetrating moral questions. Orson Scott Card goes on to take it a little bit further and say that if you don't talk about the moral problems that arise in a big fantasy novel, you're kind of doing the world a disservice, because once you have some sort of interesting superpower, then we have to answer the question, what is the right use of power? And I think that that's a valid response to it too. So I get really tired of the chosen one. I don't like prophecy in my stories necessarily. And yet I've had editors who said, oh, you've got a hero here. We have to have a prophecy about him. And I'm like, no, not really.
Because like fate takes away the agency?
Well, yeah, because fate takes away the agency, but more importantly to me is that, you know, there are in this room, I am sure, quiet heroes all around us, you know, people who are taking care of ailing mothers or things like that. And you don't have to have a prophecy about you in order to step up and be a hero. I just think that's sick. So I just look at it and go, okay, I'm not going to do that. And yet, of course, once again, those editors are going to come back and give you some pushback.
Yeah, I think that the chosen one trope kind of builds in a lot of room for defeatism in the characters that aren't the chosen one. And it kind of leads to the question, well, someone should do something as opposed to anyone could step up and
We can
do
all
that
do something, yeah.
And if we all did, then what a different world we would live in instead of thinking, you know, well, what can I do? So.
Yeah, I think the chosen one tends to be very elitist. You know, it's like, as you said, you know, you can't do anything because you weren't chosen. There was, you know, nothing happened. Now, actually, my writing partners and I are working on one that we love, where the chosen one actually dies, and we're trying to figure out what happens after. So it's kind of like, yes, this is fun. Yeah, and so where were we? Where are we? Are we ready for questions even? 12:36.
Yeah.
We want to go to questions? Ah, wait a minute, way in the back. Yes, sir.
So would you call the heist story a kind of community action trope, or?
It's, I don't know, there's just kind of a format, it's like Ocean's 11. It's kind of like a group of people get together to usually rob something.
So with the heists, it is a group of people who are working together towards a common goal, but there's usually a leader, someone who brought those players together because they recognized that they each had something to bring to the table, and it's taking on that role to make sure that everyone's using their strength in the best possible way to achieve that. So even there's still some singular person that's the driving force behind it.
And even within the high story, there's ways to make it even more original. Like there was that movie recently, and I always get it backwards. It's either Logan Lucky or Lucky Logan. Logan Lucky. And it's a high story, but it's like all these rednecks that maybe are a little dumb. And they pull together an amazing heist and they pull it off. So, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be like always like the brilliant minds that they're pulling together across the world. There's always something original you can bring to any plot format like that.
Okay, more questions? Yes.
So I guess I'm still a little hazy on the difference between a protagonist and a hero. Is the protagonist, do they have like the inner battles that they're just fighting, there's nothing exterior, and the hero is anyway, like I'm still, could you clarify, like a protagonist is this, and it differs from a hero because a hero is this?
I think generally a protagonist is the person that's driving the story forward, that has something to lose and a general goal. So a hero is a type of protagonist, but any more thoughts on the difference?
Yeah, I think, you know, heroes very often are people who already stepped into the process. They were protagonists at one point, but they've already decided that they're going to change the world. A protagonist is just means somebody that we care about. If you go back to the Greek roots of the story, it's the person that you care most about. And, you know, you can care about a person without them being a superhero. Certainly you can empathize with somebody who's in tremendous physical pain or emotional pain, or someone who is a lot like you. Those work really well. And in fact, I remember as a kid reading about Superman and thinking, do I care about this guy? you know, he's got really weird powers. Do I care about those? And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool to have all that strength? Yeah, that would be cool. How does that whole blowing on things and freezing them work, you know? Doesn't he have an internal body heat or something? That wouldn't he like light matches or something instead? And you know, thinking about that creates a sense of wonder, but it didn't translate to me into a strong sense of caring about whatever happened to Superman. If he had gotten ground into hamburger, I probably wouldn't have cared as a kid.
And the protagonist is just on a really basic level, just the person whose story we're reading about, you know, and we hope that they're proactive.
You just had said, sorry, I'm gonna continue. You just said that like in your book, Burning Glass, like she's a protagonist and then she becomes a hero. Like, what is that moment that the shift happens? Like,
Well, it's a spoiler.
I guess you have to buy the book and find out.
I mean, we read it.
Read the book.
It's the moment she realizes she could not just help a couple people that she was helping in the beginning. So maybe a more quiet hero, but she has a capability within herself to affect. So I don't know if we should narrow down a hero's the definition of a hero to someone that does something on a more global level. Usually most stories are, but we've been talking about the more quiet heroes too. But for me, that's when she makes a decision. She's not a passive character, but she definitely becomes a ton more proactive and realizes she has the power to change, to influence a person in a really high, powerful position, and therefore, I can't say more. It's spoilers. I don't know how to.
You go from a protagonist to a hero when you decide to step in front of the bullets.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
You know,
Yeah,
we've
there you
seen
go.
that. That's the moment. There was a moment in Field of Dreams where I can't remember the character's name. He was a
Doc.
doctor.
Doc.
And,
Yeah,
his name is Doc.
They
Yeah,
Doc.
when Doc decides
When he
to step
steps over
across
the
the line
line.
to save the little girl.
Oh my gosh.
That was a clear cut. This is a
We're
hero.
gonna cry now.
Yeah, no, it was a beautiful, beautiful scene. So this is something, if you haven't seen Field of Dreams, just watch it so you can see that scene. Yes, sir, in the back.
So outside of world-changing events, what are some good methods that you can show development of a hero?
Oh, well, I'm gonna do the standard plug in. What can you do outside of world huge things? What can you do to develop the hero, right?
Yes.
Okay, the first one, of course, the one that we should always remember in Act 1 is save the cat. But seriously, if you have an unlikable protagonist / hero, or you want to do something with them, have them do something where they have to do something like save the cat. If you remember The Incredibles, they had a scene early on where he goes ahead and pulls a cat out of a tree and everything. It was an homage to the notion of save the cat. But it shows us that while we may not like this character for some reasons, there's still something good there. So they save the cat. So what else would you add to that?
Nothing.
Okay.
Well, there's several ways to create a hero. First of all, foremost, save the cat. That's one way to release oxytocin into the brain of your reader and make them bond with that person. The other way is to put them into deep pain. And that pain doesn't need to be physical pain, very often emotional pain. Dealing with a death of a family member or something like that will also allow us to empathize with that character. In Hollywood, it's said that those are the only two ways to create a character that we empathize with, that they are wrong. One way is to give the character friends. If your character is likable, then they should have friends who really deeply care about them. A third way, or a fourth way, is to make them beautiful. Now, in movies, we tend to pick actors and actresses to play roles who are beautiful, but making them internally beautiful, making them so that what they think is beautiful, that their motivations are more noble and honorable than what the average person has. Or maybe another way to do it, to make us care, is to make them so that they have some interesting ability. I call it their superpower. And I think that every protagonist needs to have a superpower. Now, the superpower might be that you're really glib. You know how to talk your way out of trouble. I love characters like that. Usually they've got smart mouths. They don't think too much before they say something, and they very often get themselves in more trouble before they can talk themselves out of it. But there's all sorts of other things. In the movie Die Hard, we had a protagonist who was willing to go through anything to stop the bad guys. And you see him walking barefoot over glass, and I remember being in the movie theater and hearing people go, ooh, ah, oh, you know, as that's happening. But there are any number of superpowers that you can give to somebody, giving them extreme compassion or something like that. So you think about, what am I going to give them? And it doesn't have to be strength. In fact, I like to go for things that the reader isn't even aware that this person has this ability until maybe halfway through or 3/4 of the way through the story, where you say, oh yes, that makes sense. I saw that earlier, but I was never really conscious of that person's ability. So those are just some of the ways to do it.
Yeah, so in general, we feel sorry for them or we admire a quality about them. But you have to be careful when we feel sorry for them that they're still an active character, but that we have compassion for what they're going through.
That's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
And you mentioned, big world-changing events, and I think that in a good story, that big world-changing event isn't necessarily what defines that hero. It's what gives that hero an opportunity to really shine. But if you think back on your own life, all of the major things that define you as a person and that allow you to explore and realize what your own inner strengths are, they're usually much smaller things. Interactions with someone that you care about, conversations, putting your hero in a room with somebody that they look up to or that they look down on, and the way that they interact with that person normally. Those are the things that really shape your hero into who they are, and then that big event is where they get to use those strengths.
What are ways that, like, if you have a hero that starts out, like, being heroic, being the kind of person you want to be, and then throughout the course of the story, they kind of, like, lose their way a bit, how do you make sure that, the audience doesn't say, like, go to the classroom and say, I'm done with this? Like, how do you keep them invested even if the character's going off to lose it?
I think that you don't want that to happen too much, but it should happen in the dark moment of the book, about 3/4 of the way through. And then you have Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost. Whisper, you was the first one. No, but really, there's you want to usually draw back from something in Act 1 that gave them inspiration. It could be like some kind of talisman that represents a person that said something wonderful to them. But there's that kind of, oftentimes it's something that someone said that was, or like in James Bond, it's like the cool gadget that the guy gave him at the beginning that he never used. And in the moment, at the end, when he thinks he's not going to make it, he pulls out the pen and clicks it, and then everything explodes. I don't know, you need like a little, something like that, usually that's planted in Act 1.
Yeah, the thing about it is that when you've got a hero, I don't like to write stories about heroes. I like to write stories about people who grow into heroes. And that very often requires you to make a choice. There's a thing called the identity conflict that's central to every story, in which you've got a character who has a way that he sees himself. And then you've got his girlfriend who says, no, you're better than that. Or maybe it's a guide character who's trying to train him and says, you have the potential to do this. And then you've got hecklers who are saying, no, you're a loser. And I've seen that over and over again. And at some point, usually near the end, that's where your character says, I'm going to step in front of the bullet. I'm going to die in order to make sure that I change the world in a better way. And when that happens, that's when they become a hero. So losing their way is part of the struggle. And it's that moment where they make the choice that we're trying to work toward. So just have them be aware that, over the passage of time, I think any one of us, we could look at ourselves and say, yes, I was a real loser as an 11-year-old. I got in fights all the time. But by the time I was 13, I was really shiny. And, you could do that kind of thing. But that's the way your characters should be. They should be growing into a hero.
Yeah, and I would just say that be careful that they're still continuing in the external plot and the external goal, and probably where they should be losing their way is internally. that can happen all along, but they've gotta be moving the plot forward and stay active that way. I mean, you think of like Mother Teresa, who did amazing things all the time, and actually had deep issues of like doubting her faith inside. But her way to combat that was to keep doing what she needed to do. And then that gave her more faith.
Do you want to say something?
Just real quick, I think in those all hope is lost kind of moments, the hero and their allies can lose all faith. They can feel like there's no way forward, but the reader, because of those seeds, like Kathryn mentioned, the reader hasn't lost all faith. So.
One last question, then we're going to have to be gone.
What have you guys learned about the support character becoming a hero? Like, how do you set up the support character and build them to where they have that moment?
Support character to hero.
Just thinking of Sam in Lord of the Rings.
You know, the fact is that every hero just about has a sidekick, and that sidekick is there to give them support when the times are darkest, you know. Very often the support might not be that they're going to go and fight the Dark Lord for them, but they're going to figure out some way, like, Frodo, remember the Shire, or something like that, to point out to them that they need to keep on going. And Sam, of course, picking Frodo up and actually carrying him up Mount Doom is kind of symbolic of that. So those sidekick characters, you just about have to have them, otherwise your protagonist doesn't have anybody to talk to throughout the entire book. And that's really important.
Yeah, he's the sidekick is supporting the person all along, but then there should be a moment where they do something that the hero can't do himself without losing like the arc of the hero. But there's usually that moment and that can be in the dark moment, and that's the thing that lifts the person, the hero, through the hard thing, and then the hero can then
So then
conquer the big goal in the end.
They become a hero as well.
Yes.
They're heroic as well. So
And
everybody's
with that, we're going to have to close because it's past time, but thank you all.